Welcome back to another installment of our Year End in July series. Today, we're having a special episode around segmentation, and we wanted to do a dedicated conversation around this because we have found in some of our conversations with clients and among our colleagues that there are some overlooked segments that nonprofits could really benefit from engaging with the year end. And to kick off this discussion, I've got two really great colleagues of mine to join us. And the first one is Ryan Carpenter, and Ryan leads our client success at Giving DNA. Ryan, is there any other background information you'd love to share with our audience today?
Just that my experience as a fundraiser really focused on mid-level programs, identifying prospects to elevate in the mid-level while also continuing that upgrade to major gifts to help support our major gift teams. So I've really spent a lot of time segmenting, really all levels of our donors, whether it's annual fund up to major giving. And it's a topic that I really like to talk about.
Yes, definitely. We've definitely had a couple of conversations about this in the past, so I'm really excited to kind of have a focus look at year end. And then we're also joined for the first time from our. I'm going to start over. We're also joined for the first time by our new colleague Colleen Patel. And Colleen, you came to us from Operation Kindness, an organization here in Dallas, a really great animal welfare organization. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about your background before we dive into today's conversation.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I came from a nonprofit organization in Dallas, and not only am I the newest pursuant Giving DNA client success manager, but I used Giving DNA as a development officer and was fundraising while using the Giving DNA tool. So I have now sat in both sides of the computer and raised money through Giving DNA, and now I'm helping other organizations.
And a quick disclaimer for our listeners, we won't just be discussing Giving DNA today. This isn't a sales pitch necessarily. Some of these are segments that you can find within your own data using tools at your disposal. But with that quick disclaimer out of the way, let's dive right in. So why do we even talk about segmentation at year end? And Ryan, I'd love for you to start with this because so many of the conversations that we have at year end are all kind of focused around the same campaign with the same call to action. So what are some kind of use cases for segmentation at year end that can really help nonprofits get the most out of this really critical campaign time?
Well, great question. First, I feel like segmentation is a great way to really create discrete populations for targeted communication. And why that's important is if you have a targeted communication for a segment, it's going to create greater engagement, which is going to lead to greater giving and more frequent giving. Why is it particularly important to do at year end? Because this is when most organizations, like in December, raise 20 to 50% of their revenue for the whole year. And it's important that you are standing out from the crowd because everybody else is also doing the same thing or trying to. They are soliciting through every channel. And so you really have to deal with a lot of competition. And the best way to stand out is to create really engaging messaging that's going to resonate with your audience.
Absolutely. And so before we kind of had this conversation or had the idea for this conversation, Colleen, something that you shared with me was that when you were at an organization that there were some segments that you wish that you had available to you when you were doing your outreach. And I would love to know what some of those segments were.
Absolutely. So my role within my organization was to reach out to all of the live bunts each month. So at the end of the year is a really great time because, as Ryan mentioned, a lot of people give in the months of November and December. And to be able to reach out to those folks individually as a mid-level to major level giving was something that I would have loved to have within Giving DNA, and is definitely a segment that I use on a often basis, kind of sharing with our fellow organizations, as well as philanthropic non-donors. So every organization has contact information for people who just haven't given to your organization yet. So how can we engage them? Again, pulling in a good story at the end of the year, this is where your donation can go, is a good way to get those philanthropic non-donors. And then upgrade candidates. So if in Giving DNA, we can see based on an individual's giving, how they might increase their gift if asked. And this is a great time to say, hey, you gave $50 last year, but maybe you increase that. Would you donate $100 this year? So things like that.
Ryan, are there any other segments that nonprofits should consider at year end that may not occur to them as being a great population to engage?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of them. So along the lines of non-donors, I would recommend offering a match. Now, some organizations out there, you have matches almost every month. That's great. But for many others, it's not something that's frequently available and something that you want to use at year end to really entice your current donors to give by seeing the match. But also it's a great tool to entice non-donors to convert. Match offerings, they have the highest response rate on anybody's communication calendar, and it's really going to be a great tool to try to convert and acquire non-donors. Also, I think organizations should send out an additional ask to their sustainers. So I've done this with a number of organizations over the years, and typically sustainers are suppressed from your monthly appeals that go out, which completely makes sense. But the time of year when it makes sense to actually include them in would be December, because you'll see a sizable group of them are going to make that additional match, additional gift. So let's just say they're $25 a month donors. Maybe they write an additional check for $50 to $100. It's a great way to identify those that have upgrade potential and also just increase the year-end revenue. It's been quite effective. Now, on the other side, what I think is also effective, and maybe people don't do this, they should, I feel, and this is what I did a lot in my background working with mid-level programs, is steward. Now, that sounds counterintuitive to what we're all trying to do in November and December. But what we spent time doing is stewarding our mid-level donors personally. Most organizations, they're going to send out a thank you or a holiday card, and that's great. That's effective and it's meaningful. But we wanted to take it a step further, personally reach out to our mid-level who are your most valuable direct response donors, right? And so we pick up the phone, call them, thank them. And I can tell you there was so many times where people were shocked that we were just calling to thank them at this time of year, after Thanksgiving, early December, because they're getting bombarded by every organization through mail, email, telemarketing, asking them. And so they really appreciated that thank you for all their support throughout the course of the year. And it led to, and we track this, it led to greater giving from that population. So certainly if you have the ability, call all your mid-level. If you don't, call those that are most valuable to you. And there's a myriad of ways for you to determine who's most valuable, right? You can do that by who's giving the most. If you have external data solutions, you can see that from a capacity and wealth screening, but I'd encourage that highly. Another group that I don't think gets paid enough attention to, Colleen had mentioned your live bunts, which that's a great group, right? Because that's going to be a sizable portion of revenue that you potentially may lose. So you want to target them, but also people that have downgraded their giving, right? And so I would wait towards the end of December to see who is still given less than they gave in the year prior and send out a targeted appeal to those folks to see if we can get their giving up to the levels that they had been in the past or even beyond that.
I love that you brought that in to the table, Ryan, because I know that a lot of nonprofits have, according to some recent reports, have seen some dips in their giving last year compared to 2020 and 2021. And so I imagine that there's a lot of nonprofits who may be considering going out and doing some acquisition leading up to year end, and just trying to fill that pipeline in order to replace some of those donors who have lapsed. But I wonder if they're not missing some opportunities to re-engage some of those lapsed donors, as you've mentioned in some of these segments, simply because we know that the cost to reactivate someone is less than it costs to go out and acquire them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the cost to reactivate or just who is already on in your database that you could ask those non-donors, right? And so that can really help you from a cost benefit perspective. And I think it's the best place to go because these folks already know you, they're familiar with you. So it's really about putting the offer in front of them that is going to most resonate, whether that's a match, just purely the dollars and cents benefit of them making a gift, or what is it you know about them? What have they supported in the past? What have they taken part in? That you can then incorporate maybe some multivariables in a package that if you know these people gave to this type of appeal or they attended this event or engaged in some way that tells you this programmatic work we do is important to them versus this. And that those little segments that it seems like, well, it's not drastic, but that really is a form of personalization that can increase that engagement.
Mm-hmm. Colleen, I'd love to hear from you. So, when you were working at an organization and were thinking about the different messages that you should use to engage some of these folks, especially around year end, what is some of the information that you would look at to start to kind of group some of these people into and assign messaging to them?
Um, so I one thing that Giving DNA actually collects is how people want to be communicated with. So, and even outside of Giving DNA, however that individual is giving to you is likely how they want to be communicated with. So it's meeting the donor where they are, right? If they are sending their donation in through the mail, then they're very likely going to respond to something that you send them in the mail. If they're giving a digital gift, then they're likely going to respond to an email appeal. So I think it's important to meet the donor where they are and not just assume I'm going to send this mail piece out to 30,000 people, but really only 10,000 individuals send in their donation via the mail. So it's important to pay attention to how they want to be communicated with.
Ryan, do you have any case studies or success stories of nonprofits that have engaged some of these overlooked segments at year end to achieve some unexpected goals?
Yeah, I do actually. So we work with a very small organization in Tallahassee called Connecting Everyone with Second Chances, which helps the homeless community in the Tallahassee area. And they've been working with us for a number of years now. And a couple of years back, the first year-end period, they had a pretty big goal of increasing revenue by 50% year over year. And so they wanted to really be nuanced in their segmentation because they knew it was going to be a pretty big challenge. And they actually, remember, this is a small shop. There was 2 people there, but they were able to do this. They created 5 distinct segments. They identified their non-donors that were most likely to make a gift. They knew they were giving elsewhere, so they were going to ask them when they typically had never done that in the past. They then they went and identified medical professionals to talk about the healthcare work they were doing, thinking that would resonate more with healthcare professionals on their file. And they created a segment for major donors, lapsed reactivation, and one more that is escaping me. But in all, 5 distinct groups with 5 distinct messages. And again, they had a goal to increase revenue by 50%. They actually increased it by 84%, which for them, they went from raising 70 grand to $124,000 year over year in the month of December, which was huge for them. And just the ability, something they thought they could never do before, because it seemed daunting, but really it was like, okay, we have 5 distinct segments. We're going to try these 5 distinct messages to them. And it worked really well. And they continue to do that throughout the year when they have their pillar campaigns, and it's worked very successfully.
I really love that example you shared because it highlights a principle that I think we talk about a lot in some of our conversations, which is identifying the donor's case for supporting you rather than constantly talk about why you think your organization is worthy of receiving a donation. And so what are some things that you can, and I think you've already mentioned some of them, Ryan, but I love to get, kind of a more comprehensive list. And Colleen, please feel free to add color commentary here. But what are some of those things that you can use data to identify that can help you paint the picture of what it is that your donors care about at your organization that may actually surprise you, because they may be maybe smaller programs within your organization, or things that you would not necessarily think is your kind of big ticket cause to highlight at year end?
Yeah, no, I think, and I love the example because it shows that this is not something that some big development team is only capable of doing. We're talking about a small regional organization with a small team, and they were able to do it. Wasn't too challenging, and they had great results as a result of it. And so I think there's things both in your file and then externally that you can understand that work, right? Colleen had mentioned just a moment ago, channel preference for any of those live bunts come the mid-December that haven't given. Make sure that you have a targeted communication to go to them through the channel that they are most likely to respond to, and that's either determined by, how are they making you gifts, or if you have external data that tells you this is how people transact, even better. So that's one. I think also just understanding demographics, right? And so, like, do you know if people, a lot of organizations have programs that help support children, whether it's a specific children's shop or just anything from not animal welfare, a food bank to educational. And so if people have children at home, recognizing them as a parent, or if you have multiple programs and one of them does support children, talk about that program at that point in time. And so just understanding what they have supported, or do you know where they're making gifts elsewhere? A lot of people have solutions that can tell you where people are making gifts when they're doing wealth screening and such. And so seeing if they're supporting certain types of causes that maybe aren't exactly like you, but you do work that's around that, around that type of organization, pulling that story into your year-end campaign. Because again, this is the most important time of year. You want to create something that is going to resonate, stand above the rest, appear personal, or at least it's meaningful to those individuals, and then reaching them through the channel that they're most likely to see the message. That's half the battle, just making sure it's in front of them.
So I've got one final question that I would love to use to wrap up our time today, and that is, if you could pick one overlooked segment to engage in year end, what would it be?
I talked about it before. I would say mid-level stewardship, and not just because that's my fundraising background.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, these are your most valuable donors, right? In your direct response program. They generally constitute 5% of the active direct response population, but give 20 to 25%, right? And so that's valuable. That helps drive whether you're going to meet or exceed your goals. And so taking out some time to personally steward this group is going to have the most positive impact in your direct response program. And I've seen it multiple times. It works. And so having somebody or multiple people dedicated for a couple of weeks just to call and thank as many of them as possible will have a positive outcome for you.
And I might add, again, the LIBUNs. Of course, you're going to reach out to everybody who gave November and December of last year. But if you're able to look into a little bit more deeply lapsed, and then from there, the folks that gave at a higher level. So again, from my fundraising background, I might look at those who gave over a year ago, 14 to 16 months ago, and then gave a gift of at least $1,000 or whatever that number needs to be, just because they were clearly very valuable to you at that time. And maybe you can get them in this year at the year end with these great stories that you have about your organization and the mission.
That's great. And I actually have another one. So I didn't give it earlier, so I do want to mention it now. Your new donors. Your new donors that came on file in the current fiscal year, obviously they're going to be pulled into the regular communication stream at year end, but maybe versioning for them to recognize that they came on file, began supporting you this year, and then stating the case for additional support. And why that's important is because first-time donors typically only renew at like a 23% rate. But once they make a second gift, the likelihood of them retaining is up to 65%. And so that second gift is critical.
Well, Colleen, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really great kind of bonus conversation around segmentation. And I look forward to having conversations with both of you in the future.
Thanks so much for having us, Leah.
Thanks.